today for a conversation with author Pauline Gibson. She's written a book called Terry, and then she flushed it out even some more with the second edition, Terry, Footprints in the Sand. So we're going to find out about Terry. We're going to find out about this book, which she did a lot of interesting research for, and she really tackled in her novel an interesting time for sure. So, Pauline, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. I feel honored.
What led you to writing these books in the first place? This book, the original book, Terry. Why did you write this book, this novel?
Two reasons. This is based on someone that I know of, who lived in our area during the 1940s, 1920s, down to probably about the 1960s, right? So this is based on a true life experience. And secondly, I've always wanted to know, right, what was before the Windrush. Have you heard of the Windrush?
Yes.
Because there was a lot of debate about the Windrush, that 1948 was the milestone, but no one ever talks about what happened before. And I know for a fact that there were lots of people who looked like me, right, who actually were living and working in Britain, and they had children. So how did they survive? What was it like being a black person in the 1920s, 1930s, 40s, 50s, right? Living in particularly in my area, Tottenham. Yeah. So that was the motivation for writing it.
Yeah, and let's tell people about recently Windrush, what you're talking about, the scandal, that goes back to what, 1948, something like that.
1948 was when, that's when everyone came,
And there were passengers and there were some stowaways on a ship on a voyage basically from Jamaica to London. And then that exploded into, again, that people that were wrongly detained, denied legal rights, threatened with deportation, just some horrible things, right?
I just need to correct you on something. 1948 was the year Empire Windrush came over and brought the first
immigrants. Right.
They were British then. They were British. They weren't immigrants. They were British. Yeah, because I think the flag still flew in Jamaica at the time and the Caribbean. Right. So these people were highly professional people that came over. Yeah, during the 1950s, 1948 onwards. Right.
Right.
This is what happened. But later on, the Immigration Act changed. Right. This country became independent. So whereas before they came here as British citizens,
right,
the law changed. A lot of these people were required to take up naturalisation, and they didn't. So they caught in between, and that's what's happened. So one of the arguments is, right, that when they came here, they were British. So I rest my case.
Right, exactly. And then that goes to, again, part of what you're talking about with your book. Tell us, give us kind of a synopsis. Give us like a little bit of the story.
Yeah, Terry was basically a young man who was born in the 1920s, 1926, something like that, of Nigerian and Jewish parentage. What happened was the father was a student, a doctor, a professional. He went back, and the mum was also a professional, and she died, leaving two little black boys or boys of colour in Britain. Yeah, mm-hmm. And they were adopted. They were fostered by a local woman who was the friend of the mum's, and she brought them up as their own children in Britain. So they lived through the Second World War. They must have seen the Windrush, and also, the depression and everything. So the reason why I wrote this book, I wanted to find out what their experience was as people of colour in Britain, and I had to do a lot of research. A lot of things came up which I never knew, which is quite interesting. How people perceived people of colour in those days. yeah, and what they had to go through for no fault of their own, because society wasn't ready
Right.
at the time, and it needed another 20 years to probably conform. Like today, you can't call people names. Like when I was brought up, I was born coloured. When I grew up later on, I was told I was Afro-Caribbean. Yeah. Then after that, I was UK black. Then after that, I was Black British. Yeah. So do you know what I say these days? I'm a member of the human race.
I love it. Yes, I love it. I love it. Yeah. Oh, and it's interesting because, you know, the novel takes you on that journey and you can see your research in it. What do you hope that the readers, people listening to us, go to Amazon, they get your book, you know, they get Terry, or they get the second edition too, which you've shaped some other things out in Terry Footprints in the Sand. What do you hope they take away?
I hope they take away some coping strategies, because I've learned from the book how Terry dealt with certain situations and how his brother adopted a certain stance, a sit on the fence kind of stance in certain situations, and how to be tolerant and living as one, as a community. Because you had the mum, who's Jewish and British, living together with two boys who were from a different culture from herself, but they all lived together as one. So it's how do we share the same planet? How do we share the same space? Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And that's a beautiful way to end that. How do we share the same space? And you will get lost in this story for sure. I can't wait to see what you come up with next. You talked to me off the air and you were talking about going back to the 20s.
Mm. Well, the 20s was the time in if you ask local people right in this area, especially older people, when did they first see a black person? They will tell you, I didn't start seeing them until about the 1960s, right? But then if you ask people who are in their 80s, much older, they'll tell you that this was kind of a jazz capital. So if there was like music, right, to jazz, or if a famous boxer coming through, you hear those, you get those kinds of experiences in the 20s, yeah?
Yeah.
So there weren't many, I think people were more vocal and open about what they thought of, in general, right, of people of colour, yeah? Yeah. And I think later on in the 1950s, when we had the race riots in Britain, the 1950s, and they got even more vocal, yeah? But these same people have cups of tea with us. We've learned to live with each other, yeah, and tolerate each other's space, culture, yeah?
Exactly.
And so I think that's the way forward, just to be tolerant of each other and respecting each. I mean, like I went to Cardiff in Wales. Do you know about Tiger Bay?
Yes.
That's one of the biggest seaports in Britain, and they have lots of people there all over the world, right? And one thing those people have is tolerance and respect for each other. Yeah. Yeah.
In Tiger Bay.
So, yeah. But I think when they were younger, I think how can I put it? The world was a little bit more resistant to them, right? And I think how they coped is that they became hardened and in a way desensitized to what's going on around them. Yeah? Like, for example, things that we do today, we cannot do yesterday. Terry is talking about well, there's a bit when he's talking about before the war, right? How he was seen as the child with the tail. Yeah, and that's just ignorance. Yeah, it's just a lack of understanding and a lack of ignorance, right? But as he grew older, those same people became his friends. Yeah, because they grew kind of common, I don't know, common friendship,
right?
Or comradeship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So therefore, in certain parts of Tottenham, he was protected. Other parts he wasn't, because he doesn't come from that area. Yeah. Yeah. So it's coping strategies.
I like that, coping strategies. Yeah. Huh? I like your philosophy. You're right. It's coping strategies. And you will get a lot out of reading Pauline's book. Pauline Gibson, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to have spoken to your audience. And you have a lovely day. Yeah.
You too.